want to talk about U.S. and U.S. and Australia, sorry, and what I think that might be a good place to start historically. Like, let's go back a little bit, and I can jump in a little bit here too, and then we'll jump into some of the other countries. But today we want to cover U.S., Australia, New Zealand, UK, Europe, Norway, Singapore, and maybe Brazil. Maybe
we can touch on what's going on in Brazil too. Yeah.
All right. So,
where do you want to start?
How'd this get started? Why are we even having? Why is this episode even necessary? Who did this to us?
People that want their money. That's who did this to us.
Lawmakers.
Yep. Let's be clear.
Lawyers too, actually. Right?
This is all about.
You know what? Can we? No, we probably can't. I was hoping we could. Just blame North Dakota, right?
We could, but the stuff in Australia was going on at the same time. So, and I think actually, I think globally, people, the other countries paid more attention to Australia than they did.
Yeah, you're probably right.
The stuff
because U.S. was a little bit different thing.
I think so. Even though it really ended up being the same thing, or very similar, it wasn't viewed that way. I don't believe.
So 5 years ago. 2018.
That's 6
February.
years ago now.
Holy cow. What happened? 6 years ago, 2018, orders going from California to, let's say, New York or North Dakota. Was tax collected? No. Okay. So this wasn't happening.
It was supposed to be. Do you know where the tax was supposed to be accounted for?
Oh, it was on top. It was don't tell me. It was owed by the recipient. They were supposed to self-report. So they were supposed to say, I bought all this stuff on Amazon. I'm going to self-report and pay tax on this in my, to my state. That was how it was supposed to be working, right?
Yeah. On my annual tax returns, I'm supposed to list all the sales I had from out of state and then pay the sales tax at that time. Yeah. And that's, I'm sure that happened on everybody's tax returns, right?
Yeah. No one's. No.
And by the way, we need to give credit where credit's due. It was South Dakota.
Darn it.
Yeah.
Okay. I almost want to rewind and go back and say South Dakota.
No, this is all confusing, hard to keep track of. It was a Dakota, but it's the South Dakota.
All right. Yep. Wayfair versus South Dakota. Mm-hmm. Even though Australia happened first, but Australia kind of fits under that low value tax scheme bucket.
Yeah.
And as we talk about today, Wayfair versus South Dakota, and the impact of that, I think we'll really focus on. Yeah, we'll talk about it generally. We're not the experts on this by any stretch, but we are really good at it, at how it impacts the customers outside the United States.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Talk to me a little bit here. So, what was going on, and why did this get started? Why even? Look, maybe I can just ramble for a minute about this, but I think what happened was, and correct me if I'm wrong, North Dakota, right, is...
You mean South?
South Dakota sues because they want to force Wayfair, an online retailer, to collect tax versus, the recipients inside of South Dakota having to pay the tax or self-report. And Supreme Court ruled it was later in the year, right? It was in June?
In June of 2018 is when the
June of 2018
Yep.
ruled that
it was a 5-4 vote, so it wasn't like a landslide either.
Yeah, geez. So South Dakota can force anyone outside their jurisdiction to register for a tax ID and have to pay directly and self-report from the seller. The seller would have to self-report and pay, not the recipient.
And it's for larger sellers, right? So it wasn't going to be required for it, but someone who's selling a certain amount of goods into South Dakota.
Yeah. And then we still have this today where every state, so if you're outside the United States and you're looking to sell in the United States, you don't necessarily have to remit tax into every single state unless you're using a provider that is like an e-commerce platform, like an Amazon, right? They're going to do it. Or if you're using, we'll talk about this in another episode, a merchant of record service, right? Someone that is acting as like the seller of the goods, you're going to have to remit tax to every single state if you use someone like that. But I'll touch on that on a few different examples on this episode. It's not too much of a distraction, but it's important because if you are managing your own exports and selling internationally and using someone like Zonos, you can take advantage of being under the threshold in certain states and not having Nexus. And then in others where Nexus. Okay. All right. So Nexus is that state's rules that determine whether or not you need to get a tax ID, right? Typically, people, I think, often think of Nexus as having a physical location there.
Which it is.
Yes. But you're not physically there, right? You do have to get a tax ID and essentially remit. Did I get that? How'd I do?
Yeah. No, there's Nexus of if you're physically established in that state, then you're going to be doing sales tax there. Right. Or there's economic nexus, which is selling thresholds based on number of transactions or volume or amount of revenue that's being sold into that state. And each state has its own rules, which we don't have time to go into on this. But so you don't turn on all 50 states at the same time. You turn them on as you hit
Nexus. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this is why, though, I wanted to attempt talking about the U.S. Aaron is our in-house resident expert. Actually, we have a couple of us. A couple team members here as it relates to low value tax in e-commerce. So that was a good answer.
Yeah, no, and experts, let's use that loosely because being an expert on every single one of these schemes is difficult to do.
Well,
right?
So I thought it'd be important to Google, right? So I Googled like low value cross-border tax schemes before this in prep, and it's all our documentation, right?
So
we're at the top of the list, right? Yep. Go to Zonos. We have a lot of documentation on this. And a team that is dealing, with this for our retailers. And because we are not the merchant of record, it's really important that we help them monitor when they trigger Nexus in the U.S. if they're outside the U.S. or they trigger a threshold that will require them to remit tax into a specific country, which we'll get to in just a second. Yeah. Now, fast forwarding to today. I think U.S. retailers are now very used to having to deal with this, right? I mean, there's a big growth in tax companies like Avalara and some others that helped with U.S. sales tax. And then, but how did this impact merchants outside the United States that are shipping to the United States?
Well, that's the interesting part about it is this whole thing was really all about interstate commerce, and it would affect that shipment from California to New York. And so me as a consumer here in the US, I started seeing sales tax getting charged on my online orders when I was buying from different companies here inside the US. But the law wasn't written to say, hey, from one state to another. It was any transactions outside of South Dakota. And it's evolved into any state, outside of that state. So it impacts everyone globally. I don't know if it was necessarily seen that way right out of the gate. But it really impacts anyone in the world selling into the U.S. You've got to watch your thresholds.
Well, I mean, we've talked with merchants that are have not gotten registered into the states that are outside the United States and are facing, pretty substantial back taxes, right? That they need to deal with or self-declare and hopefully or notify, right, that they're hey, I'm about to register and cut me a little bit of a break. But these are some significant amounts. The U.S. is, because of our low de minimis, we have a ton of e-commerce volume coming into the U.S. And I would say that there's still a large number of retailers that are not yet complying with the U.S. law.
I would think so.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, kind of to touch on how this worked 10 years ago. The U.S. doesn't collect sales tax on import. It's always been collected at the state level through these now Nexus laws and things. So the U.S. is not even a low value tax law. It's sales tax.
And the U.S. is the only country in the world where tax has never, as far as I understand, right? Like sales tax has never historically ever been collected by customs because it's a state level sales tax. And it's typically only been paid when you're in the state, right? Or
Yep.
And so the Wayfair thing changed it. But what didn't change is the U.S. still does not collect sales tax on imports. Customs does not broker, it's not due to customs. It's always just due to the state. It's the only country like that.
And customs just deals with duty and other import fees, and that's it.
Yeah.
Sales tax has always been meant to be remitted directly to each individual state.
Yeah.
So, and we start thinking about why this is happening, and why changes we're seeing so many rapid changes over the last, let's say 10 years, because honestly, these conversations were happening way before these laws were ever enacted. But it's a boom of e-commerce.
Yeah. It's a shift from brick and mortar, right? Where it was easy to collect sales tax, brick and mortar, to e-commerce.
Yep. That's it. And then it turned into lost revenue.
Yeah. Not just for the states, but for
countries.
Right.
Now a larger percentage of the goods that consumers are buying are coming in cross-border, and with de minimis values and other things, they're seeing a loss in revenue as well as a competitive disadvantage for their local businesses.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that competitive disadvantage, which did apply state to state a little bit, right? For sure.
Absolutely.
But man, at a country level, what country was most exposed for tax, a tax disadvantage to their local, companies there?
Australia.